The rain in District 4 did not just fall, it interrogated. It was a cold industrial deluge that soaked through the layers of Nia's life, turning the cardboard insoles of her boots into a pulpy, useless mush. Every step was a heavy, squelching reminder of the distance between her and a dry bed. She kept her head down, dodging the glare of neon signs that flickered above the pawn shops and liquor stores, their light reflecting off the oil-slicked pavement like fractured glass. At 24, she was a ghost in her own city, her existence reduced to a tally of unpaid bills and the rhythmic, hollow splash of her footsteps. She reached the corner of 4th and Main, her fingers numb, her breath hitching in the damp air. She stopped to wring out the hem of her sleeve, but the water only seemed to multiply. Then the ambient hum of the city shifted. A black sedan drifted out of the mist, moving with the silent, predatory grace of a shark hunting in shallow water. It did not splash through the puddles. It glided over them. A man stepped out of the vehicle. His presence was an immediate disruption to the grey monotony of the street. He moved with a calculated stillness, his heavy wool coat shedding the downpour as if the water refused to touch him. He stopped 3 feet from Nia, blocking her path. "Nia," he said. The name was not a question, it was a command. Nia took a step back, her heel catching on a jagged piece of concrete, but she held her ground. "I do not know you," she replied. The man ignored her protest. He reached into his coat and produced a thick, cream-coloured envelope, holding it out with steady fingers. "I have been looking for you," he said. "I know about the eviction notice. I know about the 3 jobs you lost this year. Open it." Inside, a stack of $100 bills was packed so tightly it seemed to defy the dimensions of the envelope. She looked up, her pulse hammering. "Marry me. 30 days. You play the role of my wife. After the month is up, you disappear with 10 times what is in that envelope." Nia shoved the envelope back toward his chest, the paper dampening against his coat. "I am not for sale," she said, her voice cracking. The man did not argue. He simply tucked a gold-embossed business card into her pocket, his fingers brushing her arm with a cold, clinical precision. "Think about it. 24 hours. You will need that time to decide if you want to stay in the rain forever." He turned, stepped into the sedan, and the vehicle vanished into the gloom, leaving only the smell of ozone behind. Nia stood alone, the card heavy in her pocket like a lead weight. She walked the remaining blocks to her building, her legs aching with every step. When she reached her door, the hallway light flickered and died. She fumbled for her keys, but her hand stopped. A bright orange sticker was plastered across the wood. Final notice. She peeled it off, the paper tearing, and pushed inside. The room was freezing. Her radiator had been dead for weeks. She pulled the gold card from her pocket. It caught the dim light of the street lamp outside. She looked at the door, then at the card, and finally she reached for her phone. The Vance's mansion loomed at the city's highest point, a structure of glass and cold stone that seemed to reject the very air around it. Nia stepped out of the transport, her boots clicking against the polished marble of the driveway. The heavy front door swung open before she could reach for the handle, revealing a foyer that smelled of expensive sandalwood and floor wax. She stepped inside, the sudden silence of the climate-controlled air pressing against her ears. A maid stood near the grand staircase, balancing a silver tray. As Nia passed, the woman's gaze locked onto her face. The tray slipped from her fingers, clattering against the marble like a gunshot. The metal skidded across the floor, spinning until it came to a rest at Nia's feet. An elderly butler emerged from the shadows of the hallway, his face draining of colour. He stopped dead, his hand flying to his chest as if he had been struck. He stared at Nia, his breath hitching in a ragged, audible gasp. "You have her eyes," he whispered. Nia stood frozen, the silence of the house thickening around her. Before she could ask what he meant, a shadow stretched across the floor, and David Vance stepped into the light. David did not acknowledge the butler. He gestured toward a heavy mahogany door, his movement fluid and precise. Nia followed him into the library, where the air felt stale, trapped behind rows of floor-to-ceiling shelves. David walked behind a massive desk and sat, his posture rigid. He did not offer her a chair. "Starting tonight," he said, his voice devoid of warmth, "Nia ceases to exist. You are Katherine Vance." He pulled a folder from a drawer and slid it across the polished wood. "My wife has been travelling abroad for her health." Nia looked at the documents, her hands remaining at her sides. David leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers with a predatory focus. "My board of directors is waiting for a sign of stability. If you fail to convince them, they will liquidate my company by the end of the month." Nia looked at the desk, then back at David, realizing the trap had already closed. The next morning, the library doors locked behind her and the transformation began. A team of specialists moved around Nia with the detached efficiency of mechanics working on a machine. They did not speak to her, they spoke about her. One technician held a chemical brush, dabbing at her scalp to strip away the faded, uneven dye she had carried for years. The sting of the solvent burned against her skin, but she did not flinch. She watched in the floor-to-ceiling mirror as her hair was pulled, sectioned, and saturated. The dull, matted strands vanished, replaced by a rich, mahogany gloss that caught the overhead lights with a sharp, artificial sheen. Another specialist worked on her face, using precise strokes to redefine her features, erasing the exhaustion of her past life with layers of pigments and powders. Every movement was calculated to align her with the image of Katherine. Nia sat perfectly still, her hands resting on her lap, feeling the weight of her own identity being systematically dismantled. As the final layer of gloss was applied to her lips, the lead stylist stepped back, tilting his head to inspect the result. Nia looked into the glass and saw a stranger staring back a regal, polished masterpiece that bore no trace of the woman who had walked through the rain. The mask was complete. The physical training was a slow, agonizing refinement of every instinct Nia possessed. She spent hours in the ballroom, forced to walk in heels that pushed her spine into a rigid, regal arch. A tutor stood by with a pointer, correcting the angle of her chin and the rhythm of her stride. "Katherine does not rush," he would snap. Nia practiced until her feet bled, her natural, hurried gait replaced by a slow, melodic grace that felt entirely foreign. Next came the voice. She sat before a recorder, listening to hours of Katherine's recorded speeches, mimicking the specific cadence. She had to strip the grit from her tone, replacing it with a soft, cultivated elegance. Each day, she felt her own personality retreating. She would catch her reflection in the windows and struggle to recognize the woman looking back. The movements were perfect, The posture was flawless. By the end of the week, the mask was not just on her face. It had seeped into the way she breathed, the way she stood. The gallery was a quiet expanse of marble and shadow, a place where Nia practiced her new, artificial poise. She moved with the practiced grace of a dancer, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She was perfecting the tilt of her head when a sharp, rhythmic sound cut through the air. It was the sound of applause, slow and mocking. Juliana stood by a portrait of a landscape, her gaze fixed on Nia with a predatory intensity. She began to walk, circling Nia in a slow, deliberate orbit. Juliana's smile did not reach her eyes. It was a thin line of calculated malice. She stopped, just inches away, her voice a low hiss. "He is doing a marvelous job," Juliana whispered. "But tell me, do you feel her yet? The dead girl whose skin you are wearing?" Nia felt a cold shiver trace her spine, but she held her posture. "David is a taxidermist, darling. He does not want a wife. He wants a monument to his own control." She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving the silence of the gallery to press in on Nia like a physical weight. Juliana's words echoed in the silence of the gallery, a cold itch of curiosity that Nia could no longer ignore. She waited until the house settled into the deep, expensive silence of midnight. The mansion felt different now, less like a home and more like a cage of polished glass. Nia moved through the darkened corridors, her footsteps muffled by thick carpets as she navigated toward the West Wing. David had been explicit. That wing was forbidden territory. She reached the heavy oak door at the end of the hall, the wood cool and solid under her palm. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that threatened to betray her. She pulled a hairpin from her hair, her hands steady despite the adrenaline. The lock clicked, a sharp metallic snap in the stillness. She pushed the door open. The air inside was stagnant, trapped in a time capsule that had not breathed for years. It smelled of the exact sharp perfume David had insisted she wear. The room was perfectly preserved, a shrine to a life that had been whole.